Story one, I used to deliver pizzas a few years ago. It wasn't a great job, but it paid the bills. Late nights, bad tips, weird customers, nothing new. But there was one delivery I'll never forget. It was a Friday night, about 11 p.m. I got an order for 3 large pizzas, cash on delivery. The address was an old apartment complex on the outskirts of town, the kind of place where the hallways smelled like piss, and the lights flickered like something out of a horror movie. I pulled up, checked the receipt, and grabbed the pizzas. The building was quiet, too quiet for a Friday night. No music, no TV sounds, nothing. Just this dead silence that made me uneasy. I knocked on the door. Nothing. I knocked again, harder this time. Still nothing. I was about to leave when I heard the lock click. The door swung open, just a crack, and a pair of eyes peered out at me. Bloodshot, suspicious. "Yeah?" the guy muttered. "Pizza delivery," I said, trying to sound casual. He opened the door wider, and that's when I saw it. The walls, swastikas, Confederate flags, a huge portrait of Hitler above the couch, shelves lined with books about white supremacy, the Aryan race, all that shit. And the guys inside, 3 of them, all shirtless, covered in tattoos, swastikas on their chests, SS bolts on their necks. One had white power inked across his knuckles. They looked at me, then at each other, then back at me. I could feel my pulse in my throat. I was black, standing in the doorway of what was basically a skinhead hideout, holding their pizzas. "You're the delivery guy," one of them asked like he couldn't believe it. "Yeah," I said, keeping my voice even. 3 large pizzas, $42.50. The guy closest to me grinned, showing yellowed teeth. "You ain't scared?" I forced a chuckle. "I just deliver pizzas, man." The biggest one, a bald guy with a tattoo of a hooded figure on his chest, walked to the table and grabbed a stack of bills. He counted them out slowly, never taking his eyes off me. The other 2 just stood there watching. "You new?" the bald guy asked. "Been here a while," I said. "Usually work nights." "Huh, funny, don't remember seeing you before." He handed me the money, exact change, no tip. "Well, enjoy your food," I said, backing up. That's when I saw it. The door at the end of the hall. It was open just a crack, but enough for me to see inside. A flickering light, a chair, and someone sitting in it. I only saw them for a second, but my stomach dropped. A man, pale, too pale, with sunken eyes and a slack jaw. His head lolled to the side, eyes fixed on me, empty and lifeless. Then the door slammed shut, like someone had yanked it closed. I looked at the 3 guys. They were all staring at me, waiting, like they wanted to see if I'd say something. My mouth went dry. I nodded, turned, and walked out as fast as I could without running. Down the hall, past the flickering light, out the door. I didn't breathe until I was back in my car. I sat there for a second, gripping the steering wheel, trying to process what I just saw. Then the front door of the apartment opened again. The bald guy stepped out, looking right at me, and he smiled. I got the hell out of there. I never told anyone. Never reported it. I don't know what I saw in that room, but I know it wasn't right. And I know they wanted me to see it. Story 2, I used to deliver pizzas back when I was in college. It was decent money, and I liked the solitude of driving around at night, listening to whatever late-night radio show was on. You get some weird orders sometimes, usually from drunk people or stoners who'd answer the door shirtless and forget they even ordered. But this one sticks with me. It was late, close to midnight, my last delivery of the night. The address was for a hospital, which wasn't too weird. Nurses, doctors, even overnight patients would order sometimes. The delivery instructions were specific. Use the east entrance, take the hall to the check-in desk, and someone would meet me there. I parked in the side lot. The hospital was quiet, the kind of quiet that doesn't feel right. No ambulances, no movement behind the windows, just the buzz of a street lamp struggling to stay on. I grabbed the pizza and went in through the glass doors. The air inside was sterile, cold, like the place had been abandoned. The check-in desk was right where the instructions said, but no one was there. Not a receptionist, not a nurse, nothing. Just an empty chair, a phone, and a small lamp giving off a weak glow. Behind the desk, there was a hallway lined with rooms, their doors cracked open. No noise, No movement. I checked my phone to make sure I was in the right place. Double-checked the order details. Everything matched. So I waited. A minute passed, then two, still no one. I leaned against the counter, tapping the pizza box with my fingers. Hospitals always have people moving around, even at night. Nurses checking vitals, patients shuffling to the bathroom, the beep of machines. But this place? Nothing. Just me and the hum of the fluorescent lights. And then, from the room to my right, a voice, weak, barely above a whisper. "I just want to go me." My stomach tightened. The voice was fragile, drawn out like someone on the edge of sleep or something worse. I turned my head slowly. The room's door was open just enough to see inside. A man lay in the hospital bed, his body thin, his skin pale, almost translucent under the weak lamplight beside him. Tubes ran from his arms and nose, looping into machines that didn't make a sound. His eyes, deep, sunken, locked onto mine. He wasn't blinking. A dry swallow caught in my throat. I wasn't sure what to say. Was he talking to me? Did he need help? Then, "Hey man, sorry for the wait." I jumped. A guy in scrubs appeared from a side door, smiling, digging into his pocket for cash. My heart was pounding, but I forced a nod and handed him the pizza. The usual exchange: money, small talk, thanks, have a good night. But my head was still in that room. Before I left, I glanced back, and the room was empty. The light, gone. The machines, gone. The tubes, the bed, the man, nothing. Just an unmade hospital bed and a chair in the corner. My hands felt cold. My breath came shallow. I knew what I saw. I knew what I saw. I forced my feet to move, made up some excuse about forgetting where the exit was, just to stall, just to check the other rooms, empty, all of them. I stepped back, heart hammering, feeling something, someone watching me. But the halls were still. The air was dead. I turned and walked as fast as I could, without outright running. I didn't look back, didn't stop till I was in my car, doors locked, breathing heavy. I sat there for a long time, staring at the hospital, half expecting to see that pale face watching me from a window. Nothing. Just silence. I don't deliver to hospitals anymore. Story 3. I was a delivery driver for about a year in my small town, mostly to make ends meet. It wasn't a glamorous job, but it had its moments. Some nights, like this one, stuck with me for all the wrong reasons. I had 2 deliveries that night. One was going to a nice part of town, big houses, clean sidewalks, and driveways so long you had to hike up to the front door. The other was going to the rough part of town, the kind of place where every other house had broken windows, yards filled with junk, and people who stared a little too long when you drove past. But I didn't pick the order in any specific way. It was just the way things lined up. The first stop was a mansion, practically. 3 large pizzas, a side, and a 2-liter. I pulled up, crossed a little bridge they had over a decorative stream, and rang the doorbell. A woman, probably the mom, answered, took the food, handed me a $1, and shut the door. Typical. Most folks around here didn't realize we made the food too. They just saw us as the person bringing it. I got back in my car and punched in the address for my second stop. As soon as I turned onto the street, I felt it. You know that weight in your chest when something just feels wrong? Like your body knows before your brain catches up? Yeah, that. The house was almost swallowed by the junk in the yard. Old tires, broken furniture, rusted out bikes, stuff that looked like it had been there for decades. The porch light was barely flickering, like it was trying to die out. I grabbed the single pizza and stepped out of my car. I don't know why, but I felt like I was being watched. Not just from the house, but from the darkness beyond the streetlights, the spaces where shadows stretched too long. I knocked once. No answer. Knocked again. The door creaked open just an inch. A sliver of a face appeared, an eye peering out. "You the pizza guy?" "Yeah," I said, holding up the box. The door opened a little more and I saw him. Thin, almost sickly. His face looked stretched, like his skin was barely holding on to his bones. He reached out a hand, his nails long and yellowed, and grabbed the box. 15 even, I said, keeping it short. He nodded, then reached into his pocket. That's when I realized something. The air smelled wrong, not just like stale cigarette smoke or booze, but something deeper, like rot, like something in that house had been sitting too long, unmoving, festering. My skin crawled. "Hang on," he muttered, stepping back into the darkness of the house. I stood there listening. The house was silent, no TV, no music, nothing. Just the distant hum of the streetlights buzzing overhead. Then I heard it, shuffling, slow, deliberate, but not from where he had gone. It was coming from deeper inside. A low, wet sound followed, like someone dragging something heavy across a wood floor. My breath caught in my throat. The guy reappeared, stepping back into the light. He handed me a crumpled 20, his fingers brushing against mine. His skin was cold, clammy. He didn't say a word, just stood there watching me. I fumbled for my change, eager to get out of there. I handed him a 5, but he didn't take it. Just stood in the doorway, head tilted slightly. Behind him, the dark of the house seemed to pulse, like it was swallowing him inch by inch. "You need change, man?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He blinked slowly, then shook his head. "Keep it." I nodded and turned back to my car. Every step felt like it took too long, like the yard had stretched out, keeping me there longer than I should have been. I reached for my car door handle when I heard it. A whisper, faint but sharp enough to cut through the quiet. "Help me." I froze. It hadn't come from the guy at the door. It had come from inside the house. I turned my head just slightly, enough to see the guy still standing there, still watching me. He hadn't moved, but the whisper had been real. I know it had. I swallowed hard and opened my car door. "Have a good night, man." I got in, shut the door, locked it. My hands were shaking as I fumbled to put the car in gear. I looked up one last time at the house. The guy was gone, but the door was still open. And inside, just beyond the threshold, something moved. Not him, something else. A shape, just barely visible in the darkness. Too tall, too thin. It shifted, almost like it was unfolding itself from the shadows. I didn't wait to see more. I hit the gas so hard my tires screeched against the pavement. My headlights swept across the yard as I peeled away, and for the briefest second, I saw something standing just inside the doorway. Not the man, something else. Something wrong. I drove straight back to the shop, parked and sat there, breathing hard. My boss looked at me when I walked in, noticed how pale I was. "You good?" he asked. I just nodded. Didn't tell him. Didn't tell anyone for a long time, because I didn't know how to explain it. Didn't want to. Story 4, I delivered pizza all through college. It was easy money, and most nights were just driving around, listening to music, and handing off orders. Yeah, there were weird customers, half-naked dudes answering the door, people trying to pay in change, the occasional person who clearly forgot they ordered. But nothing really got to me, except for one night. That night still sits with me. It was late, maybe 10:30 p.m., and my shift was almost over when I got sent on a big order. 7 large pizzas, a bunch of sides, delivery fee, and a solid tip already tacked on. Nice. The address was in a part of town I didn't go to often. Old houses, kind of run down, mostly rentals. The street had that heavy, dark feeling, like it never really woke up. Some places had lights on, others just sat there, empty looking. When I pulled up, the house barely looked lived in. It was a small, one-story place with peeling paint and a sagging porch. The porch light was off, but a dim glow seeped through the curtains inside. I double-checked the address. Right place. I grabbed as much food as I could carry and knocked. The door opened just a crack, and a guy peered out at me. Middle-aged, scruffy beard, stained white t-shirt. His eyes flicked down at the pizzas, then back up at me. "Yeah, pizza delivery," I said. "Got a big order." He hesitated, like he didn't want to open the door all the way. Finally, he exhaled and pulled it open. "Come in." That's when I caught the smell. Stale air, sweat, something rotting underneath it all. It wasn't just bad, it was thick, like it had been sitting there for years, soaking into the walls. My stomach turned, but I forced a smile and stepped inside. The living room was just beds, not couches, beds. 3 of them, side by side covering the entire floor. Sheets, blankets, old pillows, trash piled in the corners, empty cans, fast food bags, and in the middle of it all was her. A woman, easily 500 pounds, sprawled across the middle bed. Her body sank into the mattress, her legs swollen and discolored. She wasn't asleep, but she didn't really seem awake either. Her eyes were open, unfocused, like she was staring through me. Her skin looked damp, greasy, and there was this low, wheezing sound coming from her throat. She didn't react when I stepped inside. I suddenly felt like I was somewhere I absolutely shouldn't be. Where do you want these?" I asked. The guy shut the door behind me and locked it. That made my stomach drop. "Over here," he said, waving me toward a cluttered kitchen counter. I hurried over and set the boxes down, glancing toward the woman again. "Big order," I said, trying to keep my tone light. "Having a party?" he snorted. "Something like that." I nodded, wiped my hands on my jeans. "All right, well, I'll..." "Wait." I froze. He was standing between me and the door now. I suddenly realized just how quiet it was in the house. No TV, no music. Just the woman's slow, wet breathing. "You're not going to tell anyone about her, right?" he asked. His voice was calm, but there was something underneath it. I forced a laugh. "I mean, no? Why would I?" He took a step closer. "People around here talk too much. They don't understand. They'd call someone and then she'd be gone. And that ain't happening." I tried to keep my face neutral. "Hey man, I just deliver pizza." "I don't care what you do." He stared at me for a long second. Then he nodded. "Good." The woman let out a groan. Not a word. Not even a real sound. Just this deep, awful noise, like something trying to wake up but not quite making it. I couldn't tell if it was pain or something else. The guy turned, walking over to her, and I took my chance. I moved fast, grabbed the door handle, and yanked it open. "If you tell anyone, you'll regret it." His voice stopped me cold. I looked back. He was still by the bed, but he was staring right at me. I couldn't see his expression in the dim light, but I felt it. A warning. A promise. I stepped outside and shut the door behind me. My hands were shaking as I jogged back to my car. I didn't breathe right until I was halfway down the block. When I got back to the restaurant, I told my manager that the house should be blacklisted. No explanation, just a bad feeling. He didn't argue. Later that night, I mentioned it to a guy I worked with. He lived near that street. As soon as I said the address, his face went pale. "You went inside?" "Yeah, why?" He shook his head. "You ever hear about the guys around there? The ones who keep her hidden?" I didn't answer. "They take care of her, yeah, but not for free. They bring her food, keep her fed, and she pays them back." I didn't want to know what he meant by that, but he kept talking anyway. "Cops came once, years ago. Didn't do nothing. People keep quiet because it's better that way." "Why?" I asked. He shrugged. "Some people say she's not really sick, that she can get up, that she just doesn't want to." A chill ran down my spine. "Bullshit," I said. He just looked at me. "Yeah, maybe. That house went on the do not deliver list. Nobody questioned it. I never drove down that street again." Story 5. I used to deliver pizzas for a chain in a small town outside of Columbus, Ohio. It wasn't a bad gig. The pay was decent, and the tips were good on weekends. I worked nights mostly, which I preferred. Less traffic, fewer people, and honestly, I liked driving alone in the quiet. One Friday night around 11:30, I got an order for a large pepperoni and sausage pizza, paid in cash. The address was on the outskirts of town, past the old industrial district. I remember looking at the ticket and feeling off about it. Maybe it was just the long drive or the fact that we didn't get many orders from out there, but I shrugged it off. Money was money. The house was down a long dirt road lined with trees that seemed to press in too close. There weren't any streetlights, and my headlights barely cut through the darkness. My GPS struggled, recalculating a few times before finally directing me to an old two-story house at the end of the road. The place was massive but falling apart. Wooden siding peeling, windows dark, porch sagging like it hadn't been used in years. I pulled up, put the car in park, and grabbed the pizza. The moment I stepped out, the air felt different, heavier, like the quiet was pressing against my ears. No crickets, no wind, just absolute stillness. Even my own footsteps on the gravel sounded muted. I walked up the steps, avoiding the spots that looked like they'd give out under me, and knocked. Nothing. Waited a few seconds. Knocked again. Harder. Still nothing. "Pizza delivery," I called, my voice sounding too loud in the silence. A moment later, I heard movement inside. A slow shuffle like someone dragging their feet across a wooden floor. Then the doorknob turned. The door creaked open just a little, but there was no light, no face peeking out. Hey, got your pizza," I said, holding up the box. Silence. Then a hand slipped out of the darkness. Pale, bony, fingers too long. The nails were dark, like they were bruised or rotted. The hand didn't reach for the pizza. It just hovered there, fingers twitching slightly. Something about it made my skin crawl. You gotta take it, man," I said, my voice tight. The fingers twitched again. Then the door creaked open a little more, and I saw it. A face. Or at least something that should have been a face. The skin was stretched too tight, the mouth too wide, the lips cracked and dry. The eyes, they weren't right. Hollow, sunken, but they locked onto mine, and I swear to God I couldn't move. My body just froze. My brain screamed at me to run, to throw the pizza and bolt. But I stood there like an idiot, locked in place. Then the thing spoke, except it wasn't a voice. It was a whisper too close to my ear, even though it hadn't moved. "Come inside." My stomach turned to ice. My legs finally worked again. I stumbled back, nearly falling down the porch steps. The door creaked open wider, and I swear, the darkness inside wasn't normal. It wasn't just an unlit house. It was deep, endless, like stepping inside would mean falling forever. I dropped the pizza. Didn't even think about it. I turned and ran. I don't remember getting into my car. One second I was on the porch, the next I was shoving my key into the ignition with shaking hands. The engine groaned but wouldn't start. I glanced up at the house and the door was wide open now. That thing was still standing there, but it had moved closer. Too fast. It was at the edge of the porch and I knew it was about to step off and come for me. I slammed my fist against the wheel. "Come on, come on!" The engine roared to life. I didn't think, just threw it into reverse, tires kicking up dirt and rocks. I spun around so fast I nearly hit a tree, then gunned it down that long, empty road. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I made it back to town in record time. Pulled into the pizza shop's parking lot, hands still shaking. My manager, Dave, took one look at me and frowned. "What the hell happened to you?" I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. What was I supposed to say? That a walking nightmare had nearly dragged me into some black void in a house that shouldn't even be standing? I swallowed hard. Guy didn't take the pizza. Dave sighed. "Well, that's just great. You know that came out of your pay, right?" I didn't care. I never delivered to that side of town again. Story 6. I used to deliver pizza for a few years in a decent area. 3 small towns, nothing crazy ever happened. A couple of odd customers here and there, but nothing that stuck with me. That was until one night. It was a slow shift, just me and one other driver, and around 10:30 p.m., I got an order for a house way on the outskirts of town. The address was familiar, but I couldn't place why. I punched it into GPS and headed out. The roads got darker the farther I drove. No streetlights, just trees lining both sides, their branches stretching out like claws over the pavement. My high beams cut through the darkness, but even then, it felt like the shadows swallowed most of the light. Eventually, I turned down a long, cracked driveway. Grass grew high on both sides, weeds pushing through the concrete, making it clear no one had been keeping up with the place. The house itself sat far back, barely visible past the overgrowth. 2 stories, sagging porch, windows so dark they looked like empty sockets in a skull. I double-checked the address. It was right. The porch light was on, but dim, flickering like it was struggling to stay lit. That should have been my first clue. I grabbed the pizza, stepped out, and started walking toward the front door. With every step, the air got heavier. It wasn't just the humidity, something else, something I couldn't put my finger on. The screen door was busted, half hanging off the hinges, and as I got closer, I noticed a sign on the main door. Condemned property, no trespassing, police take notice. I froze. That didn't make sense. Someone had placed an order from here. I looked down at the receipt. Cash order, no phone number. My gut told me to leave, but I figured maybe it was some squatter who had the cash and was hungry. It wasn't my job to judge, just to drop off the food and go. I stepped up to the door and knocked, but the moment my knuckles hit the wood, the front door creaked open an inch, just enough that I could see inside. A man was sleeping on the floor. His clothes were filthy, hair matted, and next to him, needles, a lot of them. There was also a little pile of something on a makeshift table. Maybe drugs, maybe just trash, I didn't know. But I knew this wasn't right. I stepped back. That's when I heard it. Movement, not from inside the house, from behind it. Something was shifting in the darkness, heavy footsteps crunching the overgrown grass. Slow, deliberate, like whoever or whatever was back there didn't care if I heard them. My stomach clenched. I turned my head slightly, trying to see without making it obvious that I was listening. Then I heard breathing. Right behind me. Deep, slow, ragged. Too close. Too close. I didn't think. I just ran. Bolted straight for my car, heart pounding, every nerve in my body screaming at me to move faster. I yanked the door open, threw myself inside and slammed it shut just as something thumped against the trunk. Hard. I didn't look back. I jammed the car into reverse, tires skidding in the loose gravel, my breath coming in the ragged gas. My headlights cut through the dark, sweeping across the house, the broken screen door, and then something was standing at the corner of the house. Tall, thin, too thin. It wasn't the man inside. It wasn't anyone. It was just standing there watching me. No eyes, no face. Just the shape of a man, but wrong, like it had been stretched too far, its limbs just a little too long. And it didn't move, didn't react. Just stood there as my car tore backward down the driveway, gravel spraying as I turned onto the main road. I drove straight back to the shop, shaking the entire way. I told my manager everything. He didn't believe me, but when he called the number on the order, it was disconnected. The next day, I drove past that house again in the daylight. It was empty, not just abandoned, like it had been for years. The porch light I'd seen, gone. The door, boarded up, like no one had lived there in decades. But I know what I saw, and I know something was there that night, watching me leave. I never took another delivery out that way again. Story 7. I used to deliver pizzas in the city, mostly working late-night shifts. It wasn't a glamorous job, but the tips were decent. And I liked driving around with music playing, just zoning out. You see all kinds of people working a job like that, but there was one delivery that still messes with my head. It was around 11:30 p.m. when the order came in. Large pepperoni, cash payment. The address was an apartment building I'd never been to before, one of those old high-rises with a weird layout. I remember circling the block a couple of times because parking was a nightmare. Finally, I pulled up into a tow-away zone and called the guy, telling him I was downstairs. He answered right away. "Come up," he said, his voice low and kind of urgent. "Hey man, there's nowhere to park. Can you just come down?" I asked. "Please, just come up. It's apartment 1903. There was something off about the way he said it. I don't know how to describe it, like he was desperate but not in a normal way. Still, I didn't want to argue. I grabbed the pizza, locked my car, and headed inside. The building smelled like old carpet and cigarettes. The elevator was slow, and when it finally creaked up to the 19th floor, the hallway was dimly lit, almost like one of the bulbs had just burned out. I found 1903 and knocked. No response. I knocked again. "Pizza delivery." The door swung open so fast it startled me, and before I could react, my eyes were blasted with the brightest white light I'd ever seen. I'm talking stadium light bright, like someone shoved a flashlight the size of a car headlight straight into my face. Instinctively, I squinted and turned my head away, but I could barely see anything. The guy yanked the pizza out of my hands. I caught a glimpse of him, a man in his late 40s, bald, wearing a loose-fitting black robe. His skin was almost gray, and he was sweating profusely. He shoved a crumpled 20 into my hand, muttering something under his breath. I tried to say something. Maybe, "Thanks, have a good night." But the words stuck in my throat because I realized something was very, very wrong. The apartment behind him was dark. I mean pitch black. No lights, no lamps, no glow from a TV. Just that blinding white beam that seemed to be coming from somewhere inside. And the air smelled burned, like singed hair or something metallic. My brain was struggling to process what I was looking at because it didn't make sense. Then I heard the whispering. At first I thought it was him still mumbling to himself, but it wasn't. The sound was coming from inside the apartment, a chorus of hushed voices layered on top of each other, speaking fast, like a prayer or a chant. It wasn't in English. I don't know what language it was, but it made my stomach twist into knots. I took a step back. You need change or..." The door slammed shut in my face. I stood there gripping the 20, my pulse hammering in my ears. The whispering was still going. It was getting faster, more frantic. Then the hallway lights flickered. Something in my gut told me to get the hell out of there, and I didn't argue. I turned and power walked back to the elevator, jabbing the button over and over. The whispering behind the door was rising to a fever pitch, almost like chanting. Ding! The elevator doors slid open, and I rushed in, slamming the lobby button. The second the doors started closing, I heard it. A wet, gurgling sound, like something was choking, or trying to breathe through something thick. I didn't turn around. I didn't want to see. I just kept my eyes locked on the numbers as they ticked down. 18, 17, 16. I don't remember breathing. I don't remember moving. By the time the doors opened in the lobby, I was already bolting for my car. I jumped in, locked the doors, and floored it down the street. Only when I was a couple of blocks away did I finally dare to glance in my rearview mirror. Nothing. Just a quiet street and the outline of that high-rise in the distance. I never went back to that building. Story 8. I used to work at this burger joint in the middle of nowhere. The kind of place where you get your regulars, truckers mostly, and the occasional lost tourist. Nothing fancy. But a while back, the manager got it in his head that we should start selling pizza. You know, expand our market and all that corporate talk he picked up from a podcast or something. It was a dumb idea. We weren't set up for pizza, we barely had a working oven, and no one came here for it. But whatever, I needed the job, so I kept my mouth shut. One night, I got stuck on a delivery with this kid, Tyler. He was new, scrawny, maybe 16, with these weird, wide eyes that made him look permanently surprised. He was one of those kids who never blinked enough, you know? Always made me uncomfortable. So we're supposed to take this pizza out to a house on the edge of town. No big deal. Except Tyler, being an absolute idiot, swears he knows a shortcut. I tell him to just follow the GPS. But no, he insists. Says he's lived around here his whole life. He knows these roads better than any map. We take his shortcut. 10 minutes later, we're lost. And when I say lost, I mean gone. The road disappears into dirt. The lights from town are nowhere in sight, and it's just endless desert all around us. Just sand, dead brush, and the occasional boulder. I check my phone. No signal. Of course. Then, like the universe is trying to really hammer home how bad the situation is, a storm hits. Fast. 1 second, it's just a little wind. Then suddenly the sky is churning, sand whipping up in sheets so thick I can't see past the hood of the car. The wind howls and the whole vehicle shakes like it's about to flip. We've got no choice but to stop. This is bad, I say. We'll be fine, Tyler says, staring straight ahead, gripping the pizza box like it's the only thing keeping him grounded. The storm lasts maybe 20 minutes, but when it clears, the car won't start. I try the ignition over and over, but nothing. Just dead clicks. Tyler doesn't seem bothered. He just opens the door, pizza in hand, and starts walking. "Where the hell are you going?" I shout after him. "House can't be that far," he says. I don't have a better plan, so I grab my flashlight and follow. We walk, and walk, and walk, for hours. My legs are burning, my throat's dry as hell, and my stomach's growling so loud I swear Tyler can hear it. I eye the pizza. We should just eat it, I say. We don't even know where we're going. Tyler stops dead in his tracks and hugs the box to his chest like I just threatened his newborn child. No, he says. Dude, come on. No. And then he starts walking faster, like I'm gonna fight him for it or something, which honestly I might have if I thought I could win. But the way he was gripping that thing, I had a feeling he'd tear me apart before giving it up. Another hour passes, and I'm about to just drop to the ground and wait for death when Tyler suddenly stops. He's staring at this massive boulder, half buried in the sand. It's round, smooth like a giant egg. This is it, he says. What? This is the way. I blink at him. What the hell are you talking about? He kneels down, setting the pizza box carefully at his feet. Then he presses his hands to the rock and bows his head, whispering something. I can't hear what, and I am officially done. I turn to leave. Then the rock moves. Not like a little shift, not like the wind pushed it an inch. I mean it moves. A slow, deliberate lurch forward, like something underneath it just woke up. I freeze. Tyler doesn't even flinch. He just stays there, hands on the rock, whispering. And the thing keeps moving, not rolling, sliding, across the sand, toward something, toward where the house is supposed to be. I don't know why, but I get down beside him, press my hands to the rock, and the second I do, I feel it. A hum, like an engine buried deep in the earth. A vibration that travels up my arms, down my spine. My head gets light, my stomach twists, and suddenly I know. This thing is leading us. I don't question it. I don't speak. I just follow. We walk with the rock, step for step, as it glides through the desert like a goddamn ghost. 5 minutes later, we see the house. A lone, crappy trailer, porch light flickering. The rock stops, dead still, like it never moved at all. Tyler picks up the pizza, walks up, knocks on the door. A man answers. Pizza delivery, Tyler says, completely unfazed. Like we didn't just follow a sentient boulder through a cursed desert. The guy eyes us, then the pizza. Where's my drink? Tyler looks down at the empty spot in his hands where a soda should be. Oh, he says. No drink, no pizza, the guy says, slamming the door. I stare. Tyler just stands there like he's buffering. Then he looks at me, dead serious, and says, I think we should walk back. And I swear to God, in the distance, the rock shifts. Just a little. We never sold pizza again. Story 9, I used to deliver pizzas for a chain. Not one of the big ones, but one of those local joints that had been around forever. It was an okay job, decent tips most nights, and as long as you didn't mind driving in the dark, it wasn't too bad. But this one delivery, I still think about it. It was late, close to 11:30. I was the only driver left on shift, which wasn't unusual. Most people didn't order this late on a weeknight, so when the last ticket came in, I figured it would be a quick drop-off, and then I'd head home. The address was out of town, a good 10-minute drive from the edge of the city limits. Not crazy far, but far enough that it was just this house and nothing else around. It took me down a long, empty road lined with trees, the kind that looked like they were swallowing the sky. No streetlights, no houses, just the occasional road sign riddled with bullet holes. The kind of road where you start thinking about horror movies and how the first victim is always the idiot who goes off alone. But hey, I was just a pizza driver. What was I supposed to do? Not take the order? By the time I pulled up, I could barely see the house. The only reason I even knew I was in the right place was the mailbox. Faded numbers barely visible in the headlights. The driveway was cracked and full of potholes leading up to a house that was wrong. It wasn't falling apart, but it looked neglected. No lights on, no signs of life. Just this squat, dark house sitting there, like it was waiting. I rolled up slowly, my headlights sweeping over a tree in the yard. At first, I thought it was full of wind chimes, but as I looked closer, I realized they weren't wind chimes at all. They were weird, twisted mobiles, bundles of sticks, bones, and bits of metal hanging from twine. Some looked like little dolls, Others like shapes I didn't recognize. They swayed slightly in the breeze, clinking together just enough to make noise. My stomach twisted, and every instinct told me to turn around and leave. But I was already here, and I wanted my tip. I grabbed the pizza and walked up to the porch. No light, no movement inside. I knocked, half hoping no one would answer so I could just go back to my car. But the door opened almost immediately. The guy standing there was off. He was barefoot, wearing jeans and a stained white tank top. He had no teeth. None. His gums were exposed, raw-looking as he grinned at me. He swayed slightly, drunk or high, and his eyes were glassy but locked onto mine in a way that made my skin crawl. "Pizza?" I said, trying to keep my voice even. He didn't respond right away, just stared for a second too long. Then he nodded, reached into his pocket, and pulled out a crumpled wad of cash. As he held it out, his other hand touched the doorframe, his fingers tapping, almost like a nervous tick. But the sound it made was weird, hollow, like he was knocking on metal instead of wood. "You want to come inside?" he slurred, still holding the money out. "Nah, I gotta get back," I said quickly. "Store tracks our times." His grin faltered, just for a second. Then he laughed, a wheezing, wet sound. "Oh, come on, just a minute. Got beer inside." "No, I'm good." His hand stopped tapping, and for the first time I noticed the doorway. The inside of it was lined with something. I had to tilt my head to see. Little symbols carved deep into the wood, running all the way up and around the frame. The cuts were rough but precise, like someone had spent a long time making sure they were perfect. My gut was screaming at me now, every inch of me telling me to get the hell out. "All right," I said, forcing a smile. "Here's your pizza." He didn't take it right away. He just stood there, still holding the money, still grinning that horrible, toothless grin. And then, just as I was about to shove the box into his hands and leave, something moved behind him. It was quick, too quick, just a shadow in the dark, slipping past the doorway like it was watching. The air felt thick suddenly, like the humidity had doubled in an instant. My breath caught in my throat, and I took a step back without meaning to. "You sure?" he asked again, voice lower now, more insistent. "Yeah," I said, louder than I meant to. "I'm sure." He stared at me for another long second. Then he shoved the money into my hand, snatched the pizza, and slammed the door shut. I didn't count the cash. I didn't say anything. I just turned and walked as fast as I could back to my car, trying not to run. My hands were shaking as I fumbled for my keys. I started the engine, threw it into reverse, and backed out so fast I nearly hit one of those awful mobiles. The sound of them clacking together followed me all the way down the driveway. I didn't stop until I hit the main road, headlights washing over empty asphalt. I gripped the wheel so tight my knuckles ached, my breath coming in sharp, uneven bursts. The whole way back to the store, I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see something sitting in my back seat, grinning at me with those empty gums. I never took another order to that house. Story 10. I used to deliver pizzas for this small joint in town, the kind of place that had been around forever, but never got popular. Mostly regulars, a few drunk college kids on weekends, nothing out of the ordinary. I worked the evening shifts, riding my bicycle to make deliveries because I didn't have a car. It wasn't a great job, but it paid the bills. One night near closing time, I got an order for a single large cheese pizza. Nothing special except for the address. It was on the outskirts of town, past where the streetlights ended, where the houses weren't really houses anymore. Just old structures, forgotten buildings with peeling paint and warped wood. The kind of place you pass by in the daytime and wonder if anyone actually lives there. I asked my manager about it, but he just shrugged. "Paying customer. Just take the pizza and get back quick." So I did. The ride out there was eerie. The streets were empty, dead silent except for the hum of my tires and the occasional rustling of the wind through the trees. The further I went, the darker it got. My bike's little front light barely cut through the black. I remember thinking I should turn around. Something about the air felt wrong, heavy. The house was at the very end of the road, hidden behind a thick line of trees. It was old, so old it looked like it should have collapsed years ago. There were no cars outside, no lights in the windows. but the front door was slightly open, just enough to see that someone was inside. I swallowed hard, knocked once, and waited. A full minute passed before I heard movement. Slow footsteps, like whoever was inside had to think about each step before taking it. Then the door creaked open wider. A man stood there, backlit by candlelight. He was tall and thin, his face obscured by shadows. He didn't say anything at first, just stared at me. The air smelled strange, like old books, wax, and something faintly metallic. I cleared my throat. Pizza delivery. He nodded once, slow, then reached into his pocket. I expected him to pull out cash, but he didn't. Instead, he held up one long, bony finger. Go! I frowned. The pizza? He tilted his head slightly, like he didn't understand what I was asking. Go! Something in his voice made my skin crawl. It was flat, empty, like he was just repeating something he'd been told to say. My stomach twisted, and every instinct I had screamed at me to leave. I didn't even wait. I just set the pizza on the ground and backed away, keeping my eyes on him. His gaze didn't leave me as I turned and jumped on my bike. I pedaled hard, harder than I ever had before. I didn't look back. I made it back to town in what felt like seconds, lungs burning, hands shaking. I didn't stop until I reached the pizza shop, stumbling inside and nearly collapsing behind the counter. My manager glanced up from counting the register. You okay? I tried to catch my breath, nodding quickly. Yeah, just weird customer, he smirked. Get used to it. I forced a laugh, grabbed a soda from the fridge, and reached into my pocket for my phone. But when I did, my fingers brushed against something that shouldn't have been there. I pulled it out, a stack of cash, crisp folded bills, more than I'd ever gotten in tips before. I flipped through them, my heart hammering in my chest. It was a lot. More than the cost of the pizza, more than I made in a week. I hadn't taken anything from that house. I hadn't seen him move. I knew I hadn't put my hands in my pocket once the entire time I was there. I dropped the money like it burned me. It scattered across the floor, the bills landing haphazardly at my feet. I didn't pick it up. I didn't touch it again. I just backed away, grabbed my bike, and rode home as fast as I could. I quit the next day. Thanks for watching. Don't leave before leaving a like to this video. Also hit the subscribe button to support my work. And as always, have a horrific nightmare, my dear.